It happened in a grocery store parking lot in Fort Worth, Texas. The sun was blazing down on the pavement, and I was walking out with a bag of dog treats and a gallon of milk. My name's Arthur Langston. I'm 76 years old. I served 2 tours overseas and came home with a body full of pain but a heart still loyal to this country. As I crossed toward my old pickup, I heard the screech of tires and saw flashing blue and red lights. A police SUV whipped into the lot, cutting off my path. 2 officers jumped out, yelling at me to stop and raise my hands. Confused, I froze. One officer barked, "We got a report of a suspicious male matching your description." I told them they were mistaken. I had my VA card and ID right in my wallet. But they didn't listen. One of them reached for the radio and shouted into it, requesting canine support for a non-compliant subject. Non-compliant? I was barely moving. Within minutes, another cruiser pulled in, this one with a large black and tan German Shepherd in the back, barking and clawing at the cage. The handler, a younger cop with mirrored sunglasses, jumped out and unlatched the back. On my command, he told the dog, pointing at me. I looked that dog dead in the eyes. What happened next didn't just stop the officers, it stopped time. The officer raised his voice and shouted the command, "Get him." The German Shepherd bolted forward, powerful, fast, and focused. I braced myself, expecting to feel teeth sink into my arm or leg. But as the dog charged within feet of me, something changed. He stopped. Right there in front of me, the canine froze. His ears twitched, his head tilted to the side, and then he sniffed the air. Slowly, the dog stepped closer, not aggressively, but carefully. He sniffed the hem of my pants, then raised his eyes to meet mine. And then, he sat down. Completely calm. Tongue out, tail wagging slightly. The cop who gave the order looked stunned. "What the?" "Reggie," I said, "get him." The dog didn't move. Instead, he let out a soft whine and laid down at my feet, resting his head on the ground beside my boot like we'd been best friends for years. The silence was unbearable. Even the officers didn't know what to say. Then I knelt down slowly and reached out. The dog didn't flinch, he nuzzled into my hand. I scratched behind his ears, just like I used to with my own dogs back when I had a little house and a backyard. The second officer spoke, finally breaking the silence. "Maybe it's a malfunction. He's never disobeyed a direct command before." But it wasn't a malfunction. It was something else. I looked up at the officers and said calmly, "This dog knows who I am." They scoffed, exchanged glances. The younger one muttered, "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer right away. I just kept my hand on the dog's neck, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't confused. He was loyal. "He's military trained," I said. "I can tell by the way he moved. That's not a regular police canine. That's a combat dog." The handler stiffened. "He was military. We got him through the surplus program. Said he'd done 2 tours overseas." I nodded. So did I. I reached into my shirt pocket and slowly pulled out a worn dog tag. Not mine, one I kept from a partner who didn't make it back. The dog's eyes tracked the tag, then he looked back at me, nose twitching. "He remembers something," I said softly. "Maybe it's the scent of sand and sweat, maybe it's just instinct. But he knows I'm not the enemy." The other officer stepped back, nervously adjusting his belt. "This don't make sense. Dogs don't just pick and choose." But this one had. The canine stayed lying at my feet, tail tapping gently against the asphalt. People had started gathering now, drawn by the sirens and shouting. A woman took out her phone and began recording. A man called out, "Why are you messing with that old vet? He didn't do anything." The tension thickened. The officers were sweating now, not from the heat, but from uncertainty. And then came the voice from behind us. A commanding voice. "Stand down, officers." The voice was deep, firm, and calm, carrying the weight of authority that didn't ask for obedience, it expected it. We all turned. A tall man in military fatigues walked briskly toward us from a black SUV that had pulled up silently behind the scene. He wore no visible rank, but the way he moved told you exactly who he was, someone high up. Behind him, two others stepped out, similarly dressed, their eyes scanning everything. The lead officer stammered, "Sir, this is an active, quiet." The man didn't even raise his voice. He walked straight up to me, looked down at the canine, and then at the dog tag still resting in my palm. He locked eyes with me and gave a slow nod. "Mr. Langston." "That's me," I replied, standing up slowly. He extended his hand. "Colonel Mason. Pentagon liaison for the Tactical K-9 Transition Program." I shook his hand. It was a firm grip, military all the way. He turned to the officers. "This man is a decorated veteran with clearance levels higher than anyone here. And this dog? His name is Baron. Served under the same unit as Mr. Langston. They've met before." The silence was deafening. The dog, Baron, lifted his head at the sound of his name, then sat up proudly. The younger officer's mouth hung open. "That can't be. That's not in the file." "No," Colonel Mason cut him off. "Because it wasn't supposed to be in the file. Until now." He turned back to me. "We've been looking for you, sir. And now, thanks to a terrible mistake, we found you." Colonel Mason's words hit me like a freight train. "You were looking for me?" I asked, still not letting go of Baron. He nodded. "There's something we never told the public about Baron's last mission. He went missing during extraction in Kandahar. We thought he was lost, until he resurfaced stateside through a surplus adoption program. But when handlers started noticing his unusual behavior, refusing orders in certain situations, we knew there was more to it." The colonel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We ran a scan on the service tags embedded in his training chip. There was one connection we hadn't followed up on. Yours. You trained with his unit. You saved the handler he was bonded with." Baron didn't forget. One of the officers muttered under his breath, "So, the dog broke protocol over some old memory." Mason turned to him sharply. "No. The dog honored it." Baron stood now, pressed gently against my leg like a silent protector. His gaze never left Mason, ears alert, but his posture was calm and resolute, like he was standing guard. I felt something stir inside me. Not anger, not pride, just purpose. Colonel Mason continued. "We're restarting the Valor Bond program, pairing retired service dogs with their original units, or with veterans they connected to. Baron led us straight to you. If you're willing, we'd like you to come back. Not for war. For something better. Training, mentoring, healing." The crowd that had gathered was silent, listening. I looked down at Baron, then back at the colonel. "Let me think about it," I said quietly. "But I'm not going anywhere in cuffs." Mason's expression softened. "You won't be." He turned to the officers. "You're going to let this man go. Right now." The officers didn't argue. They backed away, unsure if they should salute, apologize, or just disappear. Baron stayed beside me like he'd been waiting years for that moment. As the officers stepped back, one of them awkwardly reached for his radio, mumbling something about disengaging from the scene. But no one was paying attention to them anymore. The crowd that had gathered in the parking lot had grown larger. People weren't just filming now, they were speaking up. "Y'all were about to let that dog bite a veteran," someone shouted. "Thank God that animal's smarter than his handler," another said, shaking their head. Colonel Mason raised his hands and addressed the crowd. "This incident is under federal review. What you just witnessed won't be brushed under the rug. But the people weren't angry just because of what almost happened to me. They were angry because it could have happened to anyone who looked like they didn't fit some vague description. I didn't need to say a word, the truth was obvious to everyone watching. An older woman near the front, gray braids, cane in one hand, phone in the other, spoke up loud enough for everyone to hear, "You see that dog?" He remembered who fought for this country. More than those men with badges. That one stung. Even the officers looked down at the pavement. Colonel Mason walked over and gently motioned for me to follow him toward the black SUV. Baron stayed close at my side, never once needing a leash. Before I got in, I turned back to the crowd and raised a hand. "Thank you," I said. "But don't let your anger grow into hate. Just make sure you remember this moment, and who stood down when they should have stood up." The silence was powerful. Baron hopped into the back of the SUV like he'd done it 1,000 times. As I closed the door behind me, I glanced back one last time. That's when I realized, the dog didn't just protect me. He exposed something bigger. The SUV pulled away from the grocery store, its tinted windows shielding us from the world outside. Colonel Mason sat beside me in the back seat while Baron rested his head quietly on my lap. The tension from earlier had melted away, but a different kind of weight now filled the cabin, one made of questions, of memories long buried. "You all right?" Mason asked. I nodded slowly. "Haven't had that kind of adrenaline rush in years." He chuckled. "Could have fooled me. You handled it better than half my active team would have." There was a pause. Then he added, "I meant what I said, Arthur. You've got something left to give." Baron knew it. That's why he didn't bite. He remembered your scent, your voice, your presence. Some bonds don't fade. I looked down at the dog again. His eyes were closed, but his breathing was steady. Peaceful. Trusting. You ever wonder why it takes a dog to see what men won't? I asked. He never judged me. Never raised his voice. Just remembered. Mason leaned back in his seat. Sometimes I think the dogs are better than we are. More honest. More loyal. I turned my head toward the window as the SUV rolled past neighborhoods I used to know, past streets where no one would have believed the man walking quietly down the sidewalk once led field operations in hostile territory. No medals. No headlines. Just another old man. Until today. "Where are we going?" I asked finally. Mason looked over. "We've got a secure site an hour out. Quiet place. You'll meet a few of the others in the program. Some familiar faces. I'll explain everything once we get there." I nodded again. But deep down, I already knew. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something I didn't know I'd been waiting for. The SUV turned off the highway onto a long gravel road lined with pine trees. It felt like we were heading into nowhere, but a peaceful kind of nowhere. Eventually, the woods gave way to a clearing, and up ahead was a compound surrounded by high fencing, but it didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a sanctuary. A discreet sign read, "Valor Bond Rehabilitation Recon Center." As the gates opened, I saw a few other vehicles, a couple of handlers training dogs in a grassy field, and several men and women, some in uniform, some not, moving with a sense of purpose. There was no yelling, no tension. Just work. Just healing. Colonel Mason stepped out first. "Welcome home, Arthur." I climbed out, Baron hopping down beside me like a shadow. The moment my boots hit the dirt, I felt a strange rush of emotion, like my body recognized the ground before my mind could. Familiar terrain. Familiar mission. A man walked up to us, lean, shaved head, missing 2 fingers on his left hand. "Langston," he said with a grin. "I'll be damned. It's really you. Tomas?" I blinked. "From the Northern Corridor Unit?" He nodded. Still breathing, somehow. We hugged like brothers who hadn't seen each other in 20 years, because we hadn't. Baron barked twice, happy barks, and started running toward a group of other dogs nearby. One broke away and met him halfway. They played like pups, no chains, no tension. Just joy. That's the beauty of this place, Tomas said. Dogs heal. We heal. Together. Mason put a hand on my shoulder. You don't have to stay. But if you do, there's a program that needs men like you. Men who remember. Men who still stand for something. I looked around the compound. It wasn't about glory. It wasn't about revenge. It was about rebuilding what war, and the world, had taken away. And suddenly, I knew, Baron didn't just find me. He brought me home. The next day, I woke to the sound of early morning drills, commands being spoken, paws pounding the dirt, and distant barks filled with energy and discipline. But it wasn't chaos. It was controlled. It was purposeful. I hadn't slept that well in years. Baron was curled up on the floor next to my bunk, his breathing slow and steady. He looked peaceful, like he'd finally found the place he belonged to. Maybe he had. At 0700 sharp, I stepped outside. The air was crisp, the smell of dew and pine thick in the breeze. A younger vet, maybe early 30s, approached me with 2 cups of coffee. You Langston? He asked, handing one over. Heard about what happened at that parking lot. Dog made the choice the officers wouldn't. I nodded. Baron didn't hesitate. He remembered what mattered. The man grinned. That's why you're here. We walked together toward the open field, where several others were gathered for the morning exercise, some with prosthetics, others with scars you couldn't see, but all with the same look in their eyes, focus. Colonel Mason stood near the edge, clipboard in hand. Morning, gentlemen. Langston, you're up first. Me? I asked, caught off guard. You'll be leading the trust sequence, he said. Baron's already shown he trusts you. Now let's see if you can teach the others to build that same bond. I walked to the center of the field. The other veterans and dogs formed a circle around us. I gave Baron a simple command to sit, then to stay. He followed perfectly. No leash. Just understanding. I turned to the group. These dogs aren't just tools. They're not just partners. They're mirrors. They reflect what we give them: trust, patience, strength. Silence. Then one by one, others stepped forward with their dogs. Hesitant at first, but slowly, confidence began to grow. By the end of the hour, something had shifted. Not just in the trainees. But in me. I hadn't just come back to life. I had a mission again. Weeks passed at the Valor Bond Center. What started as a quiet refuge became something greater, a place where broken pieces were reforged, not hidden. I taught the younger vets everything I knew: how to read a dog's body language, how to move without fear, how to lead without shouting. But most importantly, I taught them what Baron had taught me: loyalty is earned through respect, not command. Baron never left my side. He became more than just a canine, he became a living reminder that even after war, after years of being ignored or misunderstood, the truth always finds a way back. One afternoon, as I sat near the field watching a new group go through their drills, Colonel Mason walked up and handed me a plaque. Arthur Langston, Instructor, Founders Circle, in honor of service beyond the call. I didn't know what to say. I'd never wanted recognition. But then I looked down at Baron, and he looked up at me with those steady eyes, tail thumping once. I smiled. Guess we did all right, huh? That evening, the entire compound gathered for a ceremony. Veterans, dogs, staff, even some of the people from the neighborhood who had seen the footage from the grocery store weeks before. What had started as a moment of mistaken identity had grown into a movement of healing and awareness. They called me to the front, handed me the mic. I cleared my throat. I didn't come here looking for redemption. I didn't think I had anything left to give. But one dog knew better. He didn't see a threat, he saw a brother. And in doing so, he reminded all of us what this country often forgets: honor isn't something you wear on your sleeve, it's something you carry in your actions. The crowd was silent. And then it rose. Applause thundered, but Baron just laid beside me, calm as ever. Not long after, a small statue was placed at the entrance of the center, a bronze sculpture of a German shepherd seated beside a soldier in civilian clothes. The plaque read, "In loyalty, we heal. In honor, we serve." Baron lived out the rest of his days beside me, teaching others until his final breath. He passed peacefully, on my porch, under the sun, just like a warrior should. And me? I'm still here. Still training. Still serving. Because sometimes, a dog doesn't just save your life. Sometimes, he reminds you to live it.